Welcome to Capital Outsider, a program dedicated to an outsider's perspective in New York's capital region. I'm your host, Eric Sundwall. My guest today is Warren Redlich. Mr. Redlich is an attorney from Guilderland. He has a degree in mathematical economics from Rice University, a master's degree from Stanford, and of course a Juris Doctorate from Albany Law School. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you for having me.
About a year ago, Warren, you took a chance and you defended a libertarian at the Board of Elections.
Against a Republican.
Against a Republican, no less, and you were running as a Republican in the 21st Congressional District against Mike McNulty. That was kind of a big chance to take, you're an active blogger. You support Ron Paul in a lot of different ways. Is considered probably the libertarian in the race. Have you become the black sheep of one of the black sheep of the Republican Party here in the Capital District? Or?
I thought I might become the black sheep of the Republican Party, but I didn't become the black. As far as I can tell, I'm not the black sheep of the Republican Party. I'm now running for Guilderland Town Board, and I've got the support of the Albany County Republican Committee. So I think what happened was that when I did that, particularly with regard to the Libertarian against the Republican, the Republican who I was going against lost and fell out of favor, and nobody really cares what he thinks anymore. So it worked out well.
So you haven't suffered any in terms of your defense of that particular libertarian?
No, I thought it was going to. I thought that they were going to. I was going to get some nasty, response from people, and nobody really cared.
Now, in that particular case,
I don't think they liked him as much as we thought they liked him.
We were dealing with that was an issue of ballot access, and you're currently experiencing a challenge right now for your own ballot access in terms of, like you say, running for town board in Guilderland. What's the story behind that? There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Ricard, I believe.
Yes, the cowardly Michael Ricard. I'm running for town board in Guilderland. I was asked to run for town board in Guilderland, and there's a ballot access is New York State's election laws are very, very difficult, as you know. A friend of mine is running for town board and asked me to run with him. And the party prepared some paperwork to file with the Board of Elections, and the paperwork was not perfect. And that is currently one of the incumbent Democrats in the race. I was asked to run as a Republican with a friend of mine. One of the incumbent Democrats in the race sued me, along with the Board of Elections and several other people, sued me to knock me off the ballot, and that case is sitting in a judge's hands right now. And it's a typical example of insiders in politics. This is great for Capital Outsider. It's a typical example of insiders in politics using little tricks and little technicalities, like the story with my libertarian friend in the race against John Sweeney. It's a typical example of insiders using tricks and tactics to exclude outsiders and keep them from even having a prayer of giving the voters a chance.
It's kind of the dirtiest little secret of American politics in a way.
New York politics. It's worse in New York than anywhere.
Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, they all have very hard ballot access issues and things.
I can't answer that completely. I've read that New York, that of all the election law cases in the United States, half of them occur in New York State. That New York State is sort of the hotbed of election law litigation. New York's election laws are very harsh. It's very hard to get on the ballot. If you do get the right paperwork to get on the ballot, it's very easy to challenge somebody and knock them off. It's often done with underhanded tricks, like in the case with the Libertarian against Sweeney. Sweeney himself did not challenge. It was 3 people we couldn't even find whose names were on the challenge, and we couldn't even persuade a judge to make them produce these 3 people to see if they really wanted to challenge. The election law is very much tilted in favor of knocking people off the ballot.
And that wasn't the case for this country for the first 100 years, right? You could basically walk in and write in who you wanted to vote for, and off you went.
I'm not an election law historian, so I can't answer that.
But again, what we're dealing with is the idea that in this country, as we promote our democracy, as we talk about our freedoms, in a lot of ways, when the average person, say this libertarian in particular, were to go and try to run for a higher office or something along those lines, the barriers are just immense in how they do that. Is it a lawyer thing?
No, it's...
Is it 2 parties that control it?
I think it goes down to the 2 parties. The entire system in New York State is set up to where the Board of Elections is staffed by the 2 parties who had the most votes in the last governor's election. So,
but they're just
which
doing
is
what
always,
the legislature,
the legislature has
passes
set
laws
it,
for.
The legislature has set it up so that the Republicans, Democrats control the Board of Elections, and a third-party candidate is often excluded for a variety of reasons, mainly because they don't have a friend in the Board of Elections. And the Board of Elections commissioners can lean and do something for somebody in their own party. They might not do that for a third party, unless, of course, the third-party candidate is also their candidate.
The average voter just has no idea about this stuff, though.
They have no idea, and I think they're largely uninterested. I don't think most people spend a lot of time worrying about it. But in a case like the one I'm experiencing now, and I think in the case with Sweeney, the fact that an incumbent or somebody who's an established politician tries to knock somebody off the ballot, when people find out about it, it doesn't sit well with the voters. The voters don't like that, and it's a tough sell. Well, it's we're not trying to knock somebody. This guy I'm running against now, who sued me. He says, well, I'm not trying to knock somebody off the ballot. I'm not trying to deprive the voters of a choice. I just think that the laws should be followed. Well, wait a minute. You are trying to knock somebody off the ballot. You are trying to deprive the voters of a choice. And it's classic politician double talk to say you're not doing that. It's exactly what he's trying to do.
Because if he doesn't initiate that, the Board of Elections just throws their hands up and says he's on the ballot. Right?
The Board of Elections had already said I was on the ballot.
Okay.
And if he doesn't initiate something, if no one initiates something, I mean, it's more of a common trick to not do it in your own name. You get some flunky nobody who nobody's heard of, and
sure. In this case, he's actually doing it in his own name.
He actually did it in his own name, and I think that's sort of a classic political blunder. I mean, they're so arrogant and they're so cocky that they number one, the smart thing to do would have just been ignore me. They essentially gave me free media coverage.
You're getting some coverage on this.
The local newspaper, the Altamont Enterprise, which is the main newspaper in Guilderland. Guilderland actually it's Guilderland and the hill towns, but predominantly a Guilderland newspaper, and the official newspaper of the town of Guilderland. And it's read by, there's circulation somewhere in the ballpark of 6,000 or 7,000. But when you look at the number of people who vote and you realize that people who read that paper are likely to vote, it's a big part of the voting block.
What's the typical turnout for town of Guilderland in terms of an election for this particular office?
I'm going to guess in the general election there'll be 8,000 to 10,000 votes, and maybe a little more.
How many do you need to win? In your particular case,
I would say I need about 5,000. Well, I need about 5,000.
It's split usually.
I would need about 5,000 votes, as a guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you go from running for Congress, which kind of has the romantic elements of being able to decry the federal government. Maybe you were a unique Republican. You were actually against the war, or the occupation, if you will, in Iraq.
I was against the invasion and the occupation.
But I mean, what are you dealing with in the town of Guilderland? Assessments? I mean, why are you running for a town board?
Well, the first
when
reason
you've gone to the you could have went, you're talking about the top. One of the top places to run for in the country.
Well, the first reason I'm running is a friend of mine asked me to run. I have run for Guilderland Town Board before. I grew up in Guilderland since 1973. I'm very, very passionate. I insisted, when my wife and I were looking for houses, I insisted that we live in Guilderland.
You know your neighbors.
It was very important. I know all my neighbors. I'm the de facto president of our nearly defunct homeowners association. As a good libertarian, we're working to abolish it, eliminate one level of government. There was my running mate has a big issue, and he's more familiar with it, about the town government, which is unanimously Democrat. They've now taken to hiding information from the people, and most people aren't paying attention. But if somebody wants to see what's going on in town government, they're hiding it. They're the freedom of information in reverse. And they initially came into office back in 2001 or so.
You say that, but do you really have any evidence of that?
Oh yeah, he's more onto that than I am. But the issue that motivated me, and I think motivates a lot of voters, is the assessment issue. Because in 2005, they had a townwide revaluation, and the assessments were raised, which is expected. But the way they did it was very unpopular with a lot of the voters. And then there's a grievance process where you can challenge your assessment, and they totally botched the grievance process. And I knew that, and it got news coverage. I was interviewed by Bill Lambden for Channel 13.
Now, how do you botch? To me, my understanding of the grievance process is you go in, you make your complaint, and they say, this is the law, what you're complaining about is not relevant, please move on, Mrs. Smith.
The answer to how they botched it is that we're supposed to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and people started lining up around 7 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't start hearing people until somewhere around 10:30. And they didn't have a sufficient number of people to hear the grievances, and they didn't have sufficient space, and they were locking doors the hearings should have been open, and they were locking the door, and a variety of things. They were giving people false information to try to get them to leave. A ton of
And you're
things
talking about, for the average homeowner, these assessments can just mean thousands and thousands of dollars.
I pay $6,000 a year in tax and property tax, and there are plenty of people in Guilderland who pay $12,000 a year in property tax. I have a relatively modest home, and I'm a lawyer, so I was at this grievance process, and I was representing myself and 3 of my neighbors, and we actually got our assessments knocked down substantially, about 10% reduction in our assessments, because I knew what to do. But the average homeowner doesn't know. I've done a lot of tax assessment work. I worked for a judge doing tax assessment work. I know how the process works. The average homeowner doesn't know how to play the game, doesn't know all the tricks and traps. And I was able to get my assessment reduced because my assessment should have been reduced because it was high. We had the right evidence, and I knew what to bring. So it's already stacked against the homeowner. And they stacked it even further by
shutting doors or asking them to leave.
Not asking to leave, telling you don't have to stay when if you don't stay for the grievance proceeding, you can't go to court afterwards. You've waived your right.
And it's just one day that they do the grievance?
Right. And they made it a much more unpleasant, much more burdensome process. And I just knew that it's a thing that people aren't happy about. And one of the things that happened in the course of preparing for the campaign, I didn't have a lot of time. I was just asked not that long ago, and I started looking at things, and I knew the assessment issue was the one I wanted to talk about. And my running mate is Mark Grimm, and he's happy with me talking about that issue. And I looked up, and I was checking on what are the assessments of our local officials. And, so a lot of them are reasonable. But this guy, the guy who sued me to knock me off the ballot, has one of the lowest per square foot assessments in the town. He's assessed at $196,000 a square foot.
Now, is that because it hasn't rolled around back to him, or is there some other thing going on here that is explicit? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, this guy's assessment's not as high as it could or should be, but what's really going on here?
Well, I'm not saying that there's some conspiracy, and what I'm saying is it doesn't look right, and it deserves to be investigated, and it calls for an explanation. And the explanation so far has been, no, there's nothing wrong with the assessment. It's perfectly fair. The guy's got a 2,500 square foot house. He's got 11.7 acres. He's got 2 accessory buildings. One of the accessory buildings is larger than the house. He has a new in-ground pool, and he's assessed at $196,000. There are comparable properties on his street that are assessed over $300,000. And their response is, well, it's the location. Well, the location doesn't work if there's comparable properties on the same street.
But isn't this this is a standard procedure for equalization and assessment to be able to look at these features and all these other things?
You would think that.
I've worked in those offices. I've been told that. But of course, it was just by mid-level bureaucrats. It wasn't necessarily by anybody in charge.
We will have to see. I think it's just a very simple question, though. I was talking to a newspaper reporter about it today. One of the great things about the lawsuit is it's given me great media coverage, and the local paper, not the Times-Union, but the Times Union, of course, wouldn't cover this because I'm not.
We've got an issue with Times-Union that we'll come back to. Both of us, I think.
But they're the local paper's covering it. It's great news for them. And,
in a way, you're kind of getting a little bit more media coverage from this particular run than you did as a congressional candidate, right? I mean, you had a nice segment on Channel 9 at the time. They interviewed you. You've got some minor coverage. Kind of Rex Smith turned around and said, hey, just because you're running for Congress doesn't mean we got to cover you. But in a lot of ways, this stink or this protest by this particular person has gotten you a lot of traction. So
it's gotten me traction in my local paper.
That's right.
Not anywhere else.
I'm not hearing about it in Columbia County.
And I told the Times-Union about it, and they did not write a story. They specifically did not write a story. I had a long conversation with a reporter. I know he talked to the other side. I know he talked to other people, and the editors kiboshed the story for whatever reason.
So if you win with your running mate in Guilderland, what would that make the composition of the board at that point?
3-2 with us being in the minority.
And at that point, you really, your chances to advocate or initiate change are limited.
No, it's wonderful.
You got a pulpit? I mean, is that the idea?
What's great about it is that it's easy to deny people who are outside the government access to information. Once we're on the town board, it's harder for them to hide information from us. It's easier for us to expose the things that we believe. Listen, we don't have all the information. We can't get it. They're refusing FOIL requests. I mean, they're very difficult. They're not refusing them. They're ducking them. They're giving you not what you asked for. Again, this is what Mark's been going through. But once we're in office, it's going to be harder for them to hide information from us. And if they do hide information from us, we're going to be able to see what they're hiding, and we're going to be a better place to figure it out. And it's almost like it's kind of divided government. It's good to have people from both sides.
Is it completely dominated by Democrats right now?
It's unanimous Democrats, a Democrat supervisor and 4 Democrats. And the Guilderland Town Republican Party having trouble getting together. We just don't have a sufficient number of people. It's hard to get people. When you're in the majority, when you run the town, it's a lot easier to motivate people. When you don't have those things going for you, and when the National Republican Party is not really inspiring a lot of people right now. I mean, some, but not that many. We're just not getting the kind of support we really need. And there's a lot of other issues in the Republican Party, and but I will tell you that especially my running mate's name is Mark Grimm, and he is working really hard. Mark he's going door to door. I think he's shooting for 10,000 households.
Now, when you're running for Congress, it gets kind of impractical to run around to every single event that you could possibly conceive of. But are you getting a lot of FaceTime with people in Guilderland? Are they responding to what you guys are proposing or saying, or is it a sense of general frustration that you're sensing amongst people?
No, I would say that people in Guilderland are generally happy because we live in a nice town. It's when the reality is that our town has always been a nice town. I've lived there since 1973.
It's the other side of the river from Columbia County. So
there you go. No, but when you start talking about certain issues, another big issue in our town is, and I'm kind of libertarian, so this isn't a big issue for me, but it's a big issue for my wife and for a lot of other parents is, the Guilderland Town Pool is not in great shape, and my wife literally goes to Clifton Park to take the kids swimming. And
the libertarian answer to that, of course, would be build your own pool, Warren.
Yes, I agree with that. We're working on it, but budget's not there yet.
I go to my in-laws to swim with my kids, so I understand.
No, but for the typical person in the capital region, the typical parent, it's very common to go to a public pool. And whether you like it or not, our town gets a lot of revenue, and there's a question of what they do with the revenue. And there's no reason why Colony should have better parks than Guilderland. There's no reason why Clifton Park should have better pools and parks than Guilderland.
Are we talking about relatively same size between Guilderland and Clifton Park?
Clifton Park and Guilderland
areas?
I believe Guilderland is bigger than Clifton Park.
Now, you guys have been getting some notice in the media in terms of your police department. There's been some issues going on there.
I don't think that was a big issue. There was an issue with the police chief, who I know, and I think he's a good guy. There was something that wasn't right. I don't know enough to comment on it.
Okay.
And I think he resigned. But that's an issue that people love to talk about. It's great gossip, but it doesn't affect whether you have good government or not.
And that's what that's kind of your goal, is good government. Is there such a thing?
There's better government. I'll say that. No, look, from a libertarian perspective, obviously we generally support the idea of smaller government. I don't think that's something I'm campaigning on in Guilderland. That's more, for me, of a federal and state concern.
Sure. On a local level, you're dealing with regular people, regular issues.
Well, and you're dealing with zoning issues, which, even some libertarians see a place for zoning. And you're dealing with, but we don't have sensible zoning in Guilderland. That's an issue I could talk about. I don't think most people care about that. It's not motivating voters.
Right.
But
it's cost of living, which is assessment. I mean, that's always a big
The assessment's a big pocketbook issue for a lot of people, and a lot of people have their assessments go up. And when the assessments go up, the tax rate's supposed to come down because there's how that works is the total value of the town goes up, so they lower the rates, and you end up paying a little bit more than you did last year. But they really jacked a lot of people. A lot of people got hit really hard.
Now, do you think that was in turn created by the housing bubble that kind of happened in the last few years?
Well,
and we're kind of just victims of a general economic wave.
I don't think there's a housing bubble in the capital region.
I had friends who were bidding for houses in East Greenbush, $20,000, $30,000 over what they were going for in the market, and this was 2-3 years ago, mind you. But it seemed insane to me.
But I don't think that the prices of houses in Guilderland, at least, or generally in the capital region, are above what people are willing to pay. I don't think we're seeing a collapse in the housing market in Guilderland. The collapse in the housing market nationwide, you're seeing it primarily in hot areas like Miami. I don't mean hot like temperature, but areas that had a real surge in investment. And frankly, people weren't. They're building, huge condo complexes and planning to sell them, and then, all of a sudden there's no buyers and they're imploding. We didn't really have that in Guilderland. We didn't really have that in the capital region, so I don't think we're seeing the same implosion in the real estate market here. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is the area is very anti-growth, which turns out in this case to have been a good thing for the region.
Okay.
But it's hard to build a house here. It's hard to build a condo complex here. There's a lot of places where it's difficult to build things. So Guilderland has not seen, other than some residential development, you haven't seen a lot of development, a lot of houses being built, a lot of properties being built.
So do you have a tax base to go at things like the public pools and things along those lines? Or you're just kind of reshifting things around from one area to the other with a stable revenue, if you will?
We have
constant revenue, same revenue?
We have a huge tax base. We have Crossgates Mall in We have both sales tax and property tax from Crossgates Mall. We have a lot of very expensive houses. We have a lot of things. We have a tremendous tax base, and there's a lot that we can do with our town. But the problem is that from my perspective, it's hard to get inside and see what happened to the money. We know they're getting a lot of money in.
So
we don't
transparency is a big issue for you going into this.
Again,
as a lawyer, that's important, right? You've got to have the information in order to deal with things.
Again, that's Mark's issue more than it's mine. But I support him on it, but he's more the guy to talk about that issue. I believe in it. I'm very passionate about it.
Maybe we can get Mark on the show sometime.
I'm sure he'd be willing to do it. He's a great guy. But my big issue, it's one of those things where I'm going with what I know, and I'm going with what I think the voters. I think transparency is an issue that's hard. We talk about being candidate and running for office and getting media coverage for this, fundamentally, you need to talk about things that people care about. And I know, let me be very clear, I know from living in Guilderland, from having neighbors, having friends, I know that one thing that is very important to the Guilderland homeowners, which people who vote typically are homeowners, the one thing that really, really strikes them is assessments, because that's where they're paying a lot of taxes. And you've got a lot of people who are, middle class, making decent money, and they're paying their taxes, and when they get that bill for the school tax, and when they get that bill for the town tax, and all of a sudden they're paying an extra $6,000, it's a lot of money. And
people have to go out and get second jobs. They have to do a lot of things in order to make that difference up in their household budgets.
I think it's not so much that I think the vast majority of homeowners in Guilderland are fairly well off. They're middle class, well off. They're not starving poor. There's a lot of people making $50,000, $60,000 a year.
$60,000 is a good chunk of $60,000. That's
right.
10%.
Yes, it is. But I'm just saying that if you have a two-parent household and each parent's making $50,000 a year, it's not that they need to get a second job. It's that they're not able to do the things they want to do. They're not able to save for retirement. They want to be able to.
Disneyland vacation goes away.
Or their kids' college. There's a lot of things that money can go to. And I'm not saying you get rid of the taxes. I mean, I guess
Sure.
You and I know that's what we'd like to do. But at least if you're going to be paying all those taxes, you want to be getting something for it, and you want to be getting fair value for it. And we don't think we're getting fair value for that. And the homeowners of Guilderland, they're concerned about the assessments, not so much how much they're paying, but that it be done fairly. That they be treated fairly. If I'm paying the same as the guy next door, we have the same house, it's okay. But if that guy down the street is hooked up with the town, he's got a low assessment, that ain't right. And there's a lot of properties in Guilderland. It's become focused on this particular guy, Mike Ricard's property. But I'm very well aware of a number of properties that are grossly underassessed for a variety of reasons. I have theories about it, and I think that we need to get inside the assessment process and make sure that certain properties, particularly a few commercial properties I'm aware of, or vacant land. There's one property that's vacant land I know of that was bought for $500,000, is assessed at $200,000, and hey, if you paid $500,000 for it, that's the assessment.
Sure.
And how they got away with it, I don't know, but we got to fix that.
One of the things before we let you go here, Warren, is you talk about the things that you know and your gut instinct and things along those lines. You do that quite a bit in your blogs. You're very passionate about issues. You give us certain instances of your personal life. I recall a particular post about a viewing of the Gladiator movie and talking about protecting your family and things along those lines. Talk about how blogging has affected your outlook on politics, life, things like that in general. Do people read the blogs? Are these things just this nebulous thing that guys like you and I are getting older and maybe want to be part of something that's a younger thing, or is this kind of a universal phenomenon? Where do you go? How do you deal? How do you approach your blogs when you talk about things and do stuff in them?
Initially, I started blogging, and still for a substantial reason for blogging is it's good for business. I'm a lawyer. Blogs generate business for my law firm. I can trace it.
Even if you're talking about flushable hemorrhoidal wipes?
That one's a little looser, but no, I can definitely trace revenue for my firm coming from people hitting my blog, seeing something relevant to what their problem is. Primarily, that's a blog post about speeding tickets, or it's a blog post about DWI law, or it's a blog post about personal injury. But
sometimes it's a blog post about Ron Paul.
Or it might be some. But what happened is that along the way, I found out that not only does it generate business, but I enjoy writing blog posts, and I have a restaurant review blog. Somebody just emailed me today asking me for a recommendation on a restaurant under a certain situation. I write a primarily political blog called the Stop Wasting Money blog. If you search on Google for Stop Wasting Money, you'll find my blog. I write my lawyer blog, my main lawyer blog, and I write another blog on personal injury law. I probably have some other blog out there I can't think of. And I just, something catches my eye, particularly if I read a Wall Street Journal article, I see something on the news, I'll write a blog post about it. I just saw something about global warming today, and I'm tempted to write a blog post about that, something I've blogged about before. Ron Paul fascinates me. Ron Paul is a depending on which mainstream media person you talk to, he's either second-tier or third-tier candidate for president who just happens to win every internet poll that's ever done. And also won a number of straw polls recently, and the mainstream media is trying to find a way not to cover the guy. And he is the dream presidential candidate. I was a Ron Paul fan long before this run for president. When I was running for Congress, I was asked, by Ellen Chartock, Warren, you don't really sound like a Republican. Who is your role model? I said Ron Paul. And he said, oh, well, some wacko from Texas. No, he's not a wacko from Texas. He's a guy,
He's a real doctor.
He's a doctor. But I really appreciate that. And when I get a chance to write about something that Ron Paul's doing or what's going on with Ron Paul, I love to talk about that. And it actually generates a lot of visits to my blogs. And you asked me if people read my blogs. Yes. Number one, my websites collectively probably get about 50,000 visitors a month. My main blog probably gets about 2,000. My law firm website and another website I have get most of the traffic. But my blogs get, so I'm going to guess somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 visitors a month collectively.
We're getting towards the end of the show here, and I know, we could probably have a whole show about Ron Paul himself. Just a couple thoughts about your impressions of his candidacy, how people are responding to it. Is it going to be more than just a 2% bubble in the Gallup poll, or are we going to see some kind of a real grassroots element, maybe equivalent to a Jesse Ventura or something along those lines?
Well, the thing about Ron Paul is, number one, this is capital outsider, and Ron Paul is clearly the classic outsider candidate. The media doesn't want to talk about him. The mainstream politicians don't want to. They don't want to acknowledge him. Rudy Giuliani made a huge mistake when he singled him out in a debate and got walloped back. Rudy Giuliani said something was completely false, and the media loved him for it. It was ridiculous, but regular people saw it and they understood it. But what I think is going to happen is that Ron Paul will pull, if the campaign can focus well, which is a difficult problem for campaigns, I think he'll pull a surprise in an early race in New Hampshire, Iowa, something like that. And he'll get, a surprise number of votes, and he'll come in second place or something, and the media will really have to start talking about him.
Well, maybe we'll have you on about that time, Warren, and maybe we can see you back sometime around that primary time. This has been Capital Outsider. My name's Eric Sundwall with Warren Redlich. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.